Good afternoon. I am Rob Johnson, CEO of the Billiard Congress of America. For those of you who missed yesterday's webinar, I want to begin by wishing you and your families good health during this pandemic. While I wish we were all in Las Vegas preparing for day one of the 2020 BCA Expo, we all know this was simply not possible. Welcome to our second Business of Billiards webinar series, sponsored by Legacy Billiards and participating in our BCA Virtual Expo. Please enjoy today's seminar and make sure to visit our participating exhibitors' virtual pages to learn more about their products and pricing specials. The activity during the Virtual Expo to date has been amazing. We've had more than 575 registrations, 735 messages have been exchanged between attendees and exhibitors, and more than 68% of you have downloaded the event app. Please continue to engage on the community section of this event. This is a small industry, and the more we can help each other out, the better. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a couple housekeeping items. You will be on mute throughout the presentation. If you would like to ask a question, please type it in the question box in your chat area at any time. A reminder, your chat area looks like the caption above a cartoon character's head. You have the same thing on your computer right now. If you type that question in the answer box, the seminar presenters will answer your questions at the end of the seminar. There are several poll questions in today's seminar. Please answer them as they are really helpful for a great webinar. Also a reminder, we are recording today's session and it will be available later today on the virtual website. At the close of this session, please complete the session survey that will display on your screen. Now I'd like to introduce today's speakers, Colin Walker and Michelle Friends of the law firm Fairfield and Woods. Colin provides strategic counsel for clients facing complex employment and commercial problems. Michelle is the Executive Director of Fairfield and Woods, and in her role, she oversees all aspects of the firm's operations. Colin and Michelle are regular presenters on offering solutions for mitigating risk while operating in today's environment from a liability viewpoint. While we are all concerned with COVID from a standpoint of how it affects our sales and customer experience, we must also be aware this issue is broader than that, including how we all handle this pandemic with our own staff. Colin and Michelle will be discussing the serious issues during today's presentation. Before we get started, I would like to present to you a brief message from our webinar series sponsor, Legacy Billiards. Thank you.
$98.6. We realize in today's world, this number has taken on a more important meaning, like the ideal body temperature of a person walking into your store. However, it has a different meaning for Legacy Billiards. 98.6 is the percentage of in-stock product Legacy Billiards has available for our dealers for the last 18 months. What does this mean for you? It means your salespeople can confidently sell Legacy brand products and know they will be available for immediate fulfillment. After all, it's tough to make a sale when your customer hears they have to wait 8 to 12 weeks to get their products. As a Legacy dealer, you have access to the widest variety of in-stock products and largest selection of in-stock finishes in the game room industry.
Hello, I'm Chris Gould, President of Legacy Billiards. I invite you to contact us today to learn more about our BCA specials and 2020 new products, including a new 9-foot rustic Baron shuffleboard, new amazingly priced 7 and 8-foot Baron billiard tables, and an outdoor shuffleboard table called the Emery that will blow you away.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Colin Walker. I'm an attorney at the law firm of Fairfield and Woods in Denver. I'm going to be presenting today on returning to work with my good friend and colleague, Michelle Friends. Let me just tell you a little bit about myself and Fairfield and Woods. Fairfield and Woods is a Denver law firm. It's been around since 1934. We've got about 45 people, and we practice all kinds of different areas of law. My particular niche is litigation, but especially employment law. And as I'm sure you can all appreciate, it's been wild and crazy times here since about March 1st. But I love it, and we love it, because employment law is fascinating and it affects real people. So I'm really excited to be speaking with you. I'm now going to turn it over to the incomparable Michelle Friends.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Colin and I have presented on returning to work and getting people back out, stimulating our economy a few times now. And just to give you a little bit of background on me, not only am I the executive director, but I also sit on an international board of directors. And like you guys, we were supposed to have a conference in March. And due to COVID, we had to cancel that conference. So I feel you guys in not being together in Las Vegas today. Because of that experience, I learned a lot about COVID early on. I was assessing whether or not our conference was taking place with my fellow board members. And so back in early February, I really started to understand what was the impact of COVID, how it was spreading, and have kind of brought us all the way here today. So go ahead and kick this off. So I like to level set when I give this presentation to everybody. We all kind of know what happened, but when you really think back on it, it's been a crazy ride. You know, the first state that declared a state of emergency was Washington. Seattle was the hot spot originally back in February. Here in Colorado, we had our first case in March. Our office actually closed for virtual testing of our IT hardware and software to see if we could send everybody to work from home, which we've never done before. And we had done that on March 13th, which is actually the first day that Colorado experienced a death as well. We have never fully opened again since that closure. While that day was meant for testing only, that weekend things really spiked and we did not open again that Monday and continue on. We probably will continue on for much of the year. And so as you can see here, this is just kind of a timeline of how things have progressed. And right now for the state of Colorado, we are in what's called the safer at home and in the vast great outdoors. It's great that it's warm outside right now. A lot of people are getting out and hiking. And so we do have some rules around that. And we'll kind of touch on that and also relate to the various states that you guys might be in right now. Also, there's just a brief kind of overview. These are the national statistics as of today. I just took this screenshot a few hours ago. And so there have been 4.2 million plus cases of COVID, 146,000 deaths. We are projected to obviously hit that 150 mark and continue on. And you can kind of see there below the top cases by state. And this, if you want to learn more about this and see how your state's going, the link is on the bottom of this slide right here. But as you can see, California, Florida, Texas, still those hot spots. That's kind of shifting every day. You know, Colorado hit a point where we were really leveling out, and now we're in those higher spots of increase again too. So it's, again, a very fluid situation, changing by the day. So let's get to it. Getting ready to open. We're going to talk about supplies, building considerations, staffing models, scheduling, a little bit about well-being, and also about signage. And then Colin's really going to take you through what you have to think about to truly get your employees back in your facilities. That is the most complicated piece to this, and there are a lot of laws around that. But this also takes us to our first poll, so we can go ahead and launch that. This poll is just to kind of gather information to see where you guys are all at right now. What are your mindsets are kind of with opening, whether that's you are open, you're moving along with it. Are you waiting to open because of the government orders? You might, I know a lot of you fall kind of in between restaurants and a bar. Now here in Colorado, if you are a bar that doesn't sell food, you cannot be open for business right now. Some of you may have the same orders in your states. However, if you do sell food, you can open and operate. Another interesting thing about Colorado is that we have a last call right now at 10 p.m. Our last call is typically at 2 p.m. or 2 a.m. Sorry, not p.m. 2 a.m. And so interesting thing for business right now too. So is that poll going on? I know I can't see the polls when we're going, so want to make sure it's being presented and out there. All right, moving along. I don't know if you guys saw that. Sorry, that's hard to
Yeah,
see.
they did, Michelle. It was up about 20 seconds ago.
Okay, perfect. Good deal. All right. Well, I'm going to pass it off to Colin to jump into some of the laws that you guys should all be learning about and thinking about with bringing your employees back.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. So there's obviously been a lot of new laws enacted specifically because of the coronavirus, but we need to keep in mind that the existing laws that we've all been dealing with for years and years also still apply. There's kind of a different twist on some of them. We're going to be talking about that as we go on, but the existing laws such as discrimination, harassment, retaliation, family medical leave, and a lot of other laws still apply. In addition, we have to keep in mind the new laws, and this is a bit of a challenge because, geez, just in the past few days in Colorado, we've had some new laws, and I'm sure a lot of other states. I know most of you are not in Colorado, and that's okay. A lot of these laws are federal laws and apply across the states, and I'll be talking about Colorado laws because that's what I'm familiar with, but more importantly, Colorado, I think, is a good representation of things that are going on in a lot of states. So some of the new laws are the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. We have a lot of state laws enacted specifically to address the coronavirus. In Colorado, there was just a new paid leave law enacted, and that's true in a lot of states. And then, of course, we have state and local state. We could advance to the next slide. So one of the things that I found kind of interesting and somewhat amusing is that a lot of the agencies are really deferring to the health agencies such as the CDC. That's not always the case. In fact, a lot of agencies, in particular the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC, has a reputation, which is well-deserved in my view, of not playing well with other children. It's very interesting and kind of funny to see that in light of the coronavirus, they're suddenly playing very well with other children. And in fact, they're kind of punting the ball to some of the health agencies such as the CDC. The EEOC has issued guidance, and some of the other agencies have as well, and they basically say, if you follow the CDC, you're probably going to be okay. Now, obviously, you can't do that in a discriminatory way or in some other wrongful way, but if the CDC says you can take temperatures, you can be pretty sure the EEOC is not going to have a problem with that, and that's true with a lot of these kind of nitty-gritty healthcare and health issues.
So ordering supplies, if you are looking to reopen soon, I highly recommend getting on your supply ordering and really to stay on top of it, because we're going back and forth a lot, at least in my experience, of what's available and what's not. We do have a couple resources at the end of this presentation where you could order these supplies, but you might also check with your general suppliers of that. You know, obviously you guys have a specialty industry here, so your suppliers are likely stocking up on things. Thermometers, every state has information on their website. Going back to that CDC or going back to that map earlier, I gave you guys a link at the bottom of that. You can click on your individual state. That'll take you to information about, you know, what really is the best way to take a temperature and how to put all that in place for your employees, and also to gain signage. Gloves actually are not really recommended generally, but in, you know, giving myself a bit of a crash course in your guys' industry, it was really recommended for at least racking pool balls, and so I would recommend getting gloves. Apparently you guys also have officiants or kind of your refs out there, and this, you know, again, isn't my industry of expertise, but apparently there are gloves in your industry, and those are recommended to be used. Mask, obviously. Sanitizers, I know a lot of you have questions about sanitizing the different products that you use, from the pool tables themselves to balls and everything. The biggest thing you want to look for when you're looking at getting sanitizers is they meet that 60% alcohol requirement. This one that there's a picture of on the screen here I found was a product that was approved by the CDC to clean pool balls. Now, actually cleaning the felt and different things like that, I'll talk to you a little more about different surfaces, but you know, I don't necessarily know how to clean all that, but you really want to focus on that alcohol level when purchasing products. Also, wipes, you're going to want to buy those. They go in and out of stock, and wiping the pool tables frequently with them, that's going to be the best way to do this. And the biggest thing is as many of the supplies that you can bring yourself and just keep yourself contained, that is the absolute best recommendation out there for any instance that you're in, whether it's working in the pool hall or being in the competing or out just with your family and doing different things. It's just having your own stuff to take care of yourself. But making sure that your staff and your people know where these things are, making sure your signage is up to date and you're directing everybody in the various directions of how they can find all of this stuff and how they need to operate. So how long does COVID live? This is a very quick little graph on the various different materials that COVID can live on. As you can see, a pool table is compiled of so many different products, so it's hard to say exactly, but with looking at this and thinking about what a pool table is constructed of, I would say that yeah, COVID could live for the longest part of the 5 days on the wood edges of the pool table. So you really want to make sure that you're wiping it down constantly and that you're really educating people, cleaning overly, and educating your staff on who's going to take care of what in the pool hall. And we'll talk a little more about kind of putting different people in different positions of who does what to make sure that it's being taken care of. But just looking at this and thinking about your environment, you can take some time to reflect a little bit on how long it's really going to live and really the areas that are going to be heavily trafficked and need to be cleaned pretty regularly. So I thought I'd pop this in here for you guys. This is from the state of Colorado website. Again, you can find this information for any of your states. I realize, again, you guys are operating kind of between two industries, whether you're a bar and a restaurant or you're a retail store. And there are different things that are in place here in Colorado. Being in that middle place is definitely going to be tough for you guys. You can do things as a retail store that you're definitely not going to be able to do as a bar and a brewery. Again, here in Colorado, if you serve alcohol, you need to close at 10 p.m. That's not necessarily true if you are serving food, though. So you really want to look at what your state order has and how you really open your doors to meet the needs of where you really fall. Here on our state's website, they really kind of break down what's a bar or brewery and what's a restaurant, but unfortunately, you guys weren't listed in either category, so it does put you in a hard spot of figuring out what you're really going to operate like. Again, some places are told that they have to be closed completely. Bars without food cannot be operating right now. So some of those, then the question is what if you have a food truck? Does that change everything? There are certain laws around all of that. So I really encourage you to look at your state website because it is varying. And Colin will touch on this a little bit later on, but there's also kind of variances between the state, cities, your counties, and things like that. So we'll touch a little bit on whose rules you really need to be following during all of this. So diving into some building considerations, I typically talk about offices, but it's not really going to be that much different for you guys. Understanding your maximum capacity is going to be key. Most places are 50% of capacity. Testing upon arrival, Colin will talk more about that in regards to your employees, but you can test your patrons as well. Also, some places are out there hiring nurses. If you know you're going to have some kind of competition or you're going to have a lot of people come in, it might be worth exploring hiring a nurse to really do an accurate assessment of everybody entering. Entrance logs, that's another thing you might consider having. If you had somebody test positive, how are you going to know who to communicate that positive with? So having a log of everybody that's frequented your facility, getting their email address or their phone number so that you can let them know, when an outbreak took place and what they, that encouraging them to go get tested as well. Modifying your space for social distancing, keeping your doors open, putting arrows on the ground and directing traffic in certain ways. That's great things to do. And also just updating those CDC signs and keeping up with their recommendations for operations. There's a lot of information on their website. Even here in our law firm, most of the signage that we have throughout the firm came from the CDC website. Continuing on with some other considerations, limiting access to supply rooms or small shared spaces. Also considering storage. If you have people that usually hang their coats next to each other, you might consider getting plastic bags from a dry cleaner service so that people can cover their stuff, that it's not touching each other, or have designated cubbies for people. Really thinking it through about where is people going to put their belongings when they enter your facility. Consider, eliminating items that are shared. I've already mentioned bringing your own stuff with you as much as possible, but eliminating items like racks and chalk and the best you can to, make sure that your patrons aren't sharing as much too. And as I alluded to before, having someone that's kind of the steward for different things in your facility, whether that's turning on the lights every day and closing the doors every day, or, doing different things that make sure that, not everybody has to touch certain frequent things. We have a light switch stored in the morning here in our office, and we also have one in the afternoon. So they open all the doors and all the heavily trafficked areas and turn on all the lights in all the areas that people might frequent throughout the day. Also considering drink and mill guidelines, it's better to have ice dispensers than makers. Having an ice maker where somebody's digging into a bucket and you're touching all of this stuff, and a single pot of coffee versus a common pot of coffee. Keurigs are great products to have right now. So as much as you can think through about eliminating shared products is really going to be key to people not getting sick with each other. Now I'm going to kick it over to Colin to talk to you all about liability waivers for your customers.
So a liability waiver is a document that you have someone sign that basically says, I understand the risks of what I'm doing, and I release you, whoever you happens to be, for any liability regarding what I'm doing. You've signed these things many times, I guarantee. If you ever went horseback riding, or you went on a boat trip or something, they have you sign this liability waiver, and nobody ever reads it, even lawyers. I don't read it either. And it's in small print, and you got to sign at the bottom. The idea here is, do you have folks that come to your business sign this now? Customers, members, guests, or even employees. Some people are having them sign. We do these things for a reason. It can protect the business. A release is a wonderful thing to have, and it it does show that they're assuming the risk and so forth. These things are not always easy to enforce, and the reason is probably pretty self-evident. When you have somebody sign a waiver in small print that's legalese, and it's either a take it or leave it thing. Either you sign this, or you and your family don't get to have the horseback ride you promised the kids 3 weeks ago. There's not much choice involved there. So do not put too much stock in this. This is not necessarily going to get you out of liability. It does not absolve you from the duty to keep your business and your workplace safe by doing such things like Michelle was just talking about. On the other hand, it could help. It does show that you communicated with your customer, member, guest, employer, whatever, that you made some attempt to make them aware of the risks, and that you made some attempt to have them acknowledge that they're assuming the risks and that they're not going to hold you liable. So it could be a good idea to have a liability waiver, but don't make too much out of it. How do you do that? You need to call your lawyer on this. This is a technical legal document. It's not hard to do. Most of us have forms that can easily be modified to your system and to your business and your operations. But this does fall into the realm of don't try this at home, kids.
So we're going to take another point here, but one thing, this is about returning to work. This is really focused on your employees here. We have done this survey about 3 times now over the course of COVID. Early on, when we thought we would be opening again, we sent out this survey. I got a lot of information back from people, so I tweaked the survey and added some more questions. And then as we continue on into the summer, where we really thought that this would kind of die out, we did it again. So it's, again, one of those things that's been fluid and an evolution. But this is just to get out there information, or so that we can collect information about who do we have that's high risk, who who do we have that's possibly high exposure? And what I mean by high exposure, if you don't know that, is just people that maybe their husband or wife is a nurse or a doctor, and they're going into the hospital every day, and they could very much be exposed to COVID. So are there people that, you know, live with someone that could really get them sick? And then just going through some questions with your employees about, you know, do they have child care issues? Colin will talk about this a little bit later, but there are some laws around helping working parents right now. Also talking to people about taking public transportation. Some people have a fear of public transportation that might be, you know, a wrench in their plans for getting to work. If you're in a larger city, you might not want those employees back. You know, I've talked to people in markets like Chicago and San Francisco and New York that really aren't ready to get back on the subway or the BART or the Muni or whatever you have in your city. So, you know, sending out a survey to your employees, you could do this through SurveyMonkey. It's a free, very simple survey tool to use. But this is personal information that needs to be protected in your facility. You need to take care of it, like HR information that you already have out there. So hopefully the polls out there, you can kind of see who's been kind of considering doing a survey and who hasn't considered doing a survey. I highly recommend this, as you can't really just think that you know who's high risk or who's high exposure. I have to say, I was really surprised at how many of our younger employees had pre-existing conditions that you might not have assumed, because you would have just thought they're young and healthy and they're the ones that should be able to come into the office. And really, that's just not the case out there. So educate people. I know we've all been in COVID now since February. You know, it's really, things shut down in March, but don't make the assumption that your patrons and your employees know exactly what they should be looking for in symptoms, know how they should be acting. As an employer, you really should take the time to educate them. You know, let them know what the symptoms are. Again, you can go to the CDC website, you can go to any of your state websites. What are you really asking them to know, and what are you asking them, you know, to think about themselves and how they're feeling before they come to the office? You know, require them to inform you if they experience any symptom. You don't want them coming back in and spreading it out and, you know, having to use that log of information and letting people know that you did have a positive. You know, you all trying to, you know, flatten the curve out there. One thing that's great is most pool sticks are great for social distancing. So you guys work in a world that you have a tool right there that's easy to tell you how far you really should be away from each other. Also, another poll right here. This is a sample return to work policy. So asking you guys who's been considering putting new policies in place. This was a policy we did. It's very much related to an office, but you could easily tweak something like this to meet the needs of your environment. You know, wear gloves and mask when entering the building. We're in a high-rise office building in downtown Denver. You have to wear a mask before entering the building. They will stop you at security and turn you around or remind you if you don't have a mask. So that's also encouraging you guys to have disposable masks on site so that, you know, people can come in. You know, not congregating in lunchrooms and client lounges and conference rooms or your mail rooms or, you know, big areas, and not having people super close together, having lots of signage about social distancing, you know, requesting supplies from a supply room, or maybe not having shared pool racks out in the open, you know, so people need to go and actually, you know, they have to get balls, they need to get sticks from someone that's, you know, has wiped them all down and it's not just out there kind of in the open. I'm sure you guys all operate slightly differently, so just making sure you're thinking that through. My best advice on putting something like this together is walk around your facility. Think about how people interact. And I spend a lot of time doing that in our office, of walking into the kitchen and thinking through, okay, you know, how do we operate? And that's one of the reasons right now we don't allow coffee. Everybody needs to bring their own coffee. We're not making pots of coffee in the office, because it was just one of those things where you touch a cabinet to get coffee mugs, you touch it to get sugar, you touch it to get cream, you're touching the pot. You know, there's so many things that go into it. So really thinking through the process of drilling into your operations. If you have not considered this, I do highly recommend rethinking this and taking this and tweaking it a little bit. Kicking it back to Colin to talk to you guys about testing your employees.
So the question has arisen, can you require your employees to be tested? And the answer is yes. The EEOC and other agencies have said that. The CDC recommends it, at least under certain circumstances. And so yes, you can have your employees tested, but you need to keep a couple things in mind. Any testing needs to be job related. It needs to be consistent with business necessity. It needs to be non-discriminatory and no broader than necessary. Now that all seems fairly self-evident. I want to focus in on the third bullet point there, and I know you're sitting there thinking, well, why are we focusing on that one? Of course, I'm not going to have people of one race tested and not people of another race, and that's of course true. That would clearly be discriminatory. But if you think real hard about this, it's a little trickier than that, because there are some people out there that are particularly vulnerable to the coronavirus, and a reasonable employer might be tempted to say, well, I'm going to have the vulnerable people tested because they're at higher risk and I want to protect them. Vulnerable people like who? Like older workers, like pregnant women. Well, if you have just the older workers and the pregnant women tested, what does that sound like? It sounds like discrimination, and it is discrimination. It's discrimination on the basis of age, and it's discrimination on the basis of race. I'm sorry, gender. So that's the kind of thing where you might not, the best of intentions might lead you down the wrong road there. Used to know a judge that used to say, the road to hell is paved by good intentions, and that can be the case here. And I really think a lot of these things are tricky and people are going to get caught up on it. But you can test as long as you are careful about it and you only do it under these circumstances. So then that raises the question, what do you do if an employee refuses to be tested? That's a tough question. I'm going to give you a clear answer here, something you normally don't hear from lawyers. But before I do that, I'm going to equivocate a little bit, something you hear a lot from lawyers. The first thing I'm going to tell you is that most employees are going to be reasonable about this. And I've confronted a number of situations where employees kind of had a first reaction which was unreasonable. Why is that? They're afraid. This is a very stressful situation for almost all of us. Nobody likes this. And some employees may be a little predisposed to anxiety. They may have an anxiety disorder. They may be just kind of the person that worries. They may have some personal experiences with health situations that makes this a little more difficult to them, and they may refuse. If you reason with them, I have found, and I've been confronting these situations since February, it's most of them will be reasonable. They'll understand if you explain, we really need you to get tested. We're just trying to protect our workers and our employees, our customers, and most of them will be reasonable. If they don't, what can you do? Well, you could discipline them because, as I said in the previous slide, it is okay to require testing. It's an employee and a customer safety issue, and the government agencies are going to support you on that. You might try some lower level of discipline. You might try sending them home for a day or two, or giving them a day or two off to think about this. You might try a lower level of discipline, such as a warning or a counseling. If it really got bad, if you really had that employee that's being unreasonable, and it's important, and it may be important to you, it's important to most of us actually, I think if push came to shove, you could fire them. But again, I want to caution you on this. If you're going to take that kind of discipline against an employee, especially firing them, you better be right. You better make sure you've done everything right, because I think there are laws that are going to protect an employee. We're going to talk about those a little bit later. And can you imagine the PR nightmare? You better think long and hard before you fire an employee about this. But I think if an employee really refused after you tried to reason with them, you did everything else you could to try and get them to comply with a lawful instruction to be tested, I think you could fire them.
So I touch on this a lot when talking about dealing with COVID and recognizing that there is a well-being and mental health component to all of this. We have all been in our homes for a long time with our families. We started out with a lot of compassion, but we're all getting cabin fever and wanting to go out now. So it's tough, and it's scary, and it's draining. For many of you, your businesses might have been closed, and you might be concerned about your jobs and how you're taking care of your family, and just really recognizing that we're all going through this. This is the first time anybody's seen this, and it's tough, and keeping that in the forefront when bringing your employees back. And Colin's going to touch on that. There are some laws around this as well, that if people test for anxiety, have issues about getting back out there, there's some things as an employer you're going to need to consider with that. So educating people on the process before, having them visit your website, sending out emails, letting them know what you're doing, how they can feel comfortable coming back into your facility. Post signs to make everyone feel comfortable. Let them know there's signs that are right there that what you're doing. Almost every business has those signs of wearing masks. And, if you've felt any of these symptoms, again, going back to that education component. Communicating what you've done in terms of cleaning, if you have done that, how you're changing the operations, again, not sharing pool sticks anymore, just what can you do to give someone some peace of mind? For your employees, there might be EAP benefits through your healthcare plans that you could share. A lot of healthcare plans have beefed up their mental health programs as well. And there could be a lot of free things that you could share with people that, that they might be needing right now, and just not knowing who to talk to about this. And then the most important thing I tell people as we go through this is that we're going to miss things. Again, this is all educational. We don't have a playbook for how to get through this for any type of business or anybody out there. Obviously, we see a lot of that discussion out there with trying to get kids back in schools. There's no path on this that's easy breezy. And so we're going to make mistakes, but the more you can just have that open and transparent conversation with your employees and even your customers of what you're doing to help keep them safe, that really gives people a nice peace of mind.
So one of the big issues with the coronavirus is vulnerable workers. As I mentioned before, they may be older workers, they may be pregnant women, they may be people with conditions such as asthma who make them particularly vulnerable. And that's something you need to look to state law about. This is something I'm going to talk about several other times before we're done. There are federal laws, and then there are state laws, and there are local laws, and those laws are not always the same. That's always been the case, but with the coronavirus, it's even more so. And I think it's partially because the government agencies had to get these laws into effect quickly, and they just didn't have the time to draft them as carefully as they might otherwise. But that's something to look to state law and what is a vulnerable worker. But there's some things to keep in mind. You can't delay a start date of a vulnerable worker. That's kind of gets back to the discrimination concern. If you're hiring employees, and I know a lot of you aren't, but some folks out there might be. You can't delay the start date of a vulnerable worker, but not delay the start date of other workers, because it could be discrimination. Teleworking, I know if your pool hall, that might not be feasible, but a lot of you probably can do that. That's something that's very much encouraged for vulnerable workers, and that's something that you can do. Under Colorado law, you may not force a vulnerable worker to work on site. Now, I don't know how many other states have that requirement, but my guess is most of them. Vulnerable workers cannot be forced to work on site, and you do have to make reasonable accommodations for vulnerable workers. We'll talk a little bit more about that in connection with accommodations for disabilities.
Staffing models. This is, as Colin alluded to, there's some people that you can have come back, but there's going to be some people that you can't necessarily bring back, and you can't really force them to come back at this time, depending on their situation. So really thinking through who do you need to return, who can return upon request, and who's going to need permission to return. So thinking about how many people can you have in your facility, how many of those are going to be workers, how many of those are your patrons, knowing that this is changes from state to city, and that honestly, it's not very clear. It's a very tough thing to deal with. We have the no mask gatherings of more than 10 people in Colorado, but then we also have out there that you can only have 50% of your workforce come back. Well, we have a total of 75 people in our office. So to me, that's like, okay, we can bring back 37, but now I'm over the 10. So it's really honestly just being smart about all of it and thinking through, I have a good group of people in our office today. They're spread out. I don't, they're not all in the same corner, but just, letting people know, all right, we're going to have this many of you back. You need to social distance. This all ties back to that level of education and what you're going to do with people, having rotating shifts. One of the things that we're able to do, and I know might be harder for you, is have people working closer to half-day shifts, so we don't have to be giving lunch breaks and having to provide an area where they can make food and consume food. That was just one more thing to open for us. And so, just kind of putting that out, a poll out there to see what kind of staffing models that you guys are looking at to maybe get some ideas from each other. But it is going to be tough because it's not really going to be completely up to you about who's going to be able to come back. We have a worker that was really part-time, but she's somebody that was able to come back and has now picked up more of a shift to provide some coverage here in the office. So, if you can continue to have people work from home, that's a great thing to do, particularly like if you have operational type people or, finance people that don't necessarily need to be there for the actual operations. I, highly recommend continuing on with that as long as you can.
What documentation can you request of an employee who is returning to work? This is a tricky one, and if you're taking notes, you might want to put a big star next to this one because a lot of people are going to get tripped up on this, I think. Normally, it is okay to require a doctor's note for an employee to come to work. That's under the Fmla, the ADA, and other laws that have existed for years. And it's also okay under the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. But under Colorado's law, that is not the case. You cannot request a doctor's note because they don't want you contacting doctors because doctors are too busy. Now, the guidance that's been put out by the various federal agencies say that too. They say they recommend considering alternatives, but Colorado made it a law. You can't request a note from a doctor. What you can request is you can request information from an employee. Furthermore, in Colorado, you can't request that until they are actually coming back to work. You can't request it as a condition of staying on leave. That's also not consistent with federal law. So this is something that you need to be very careful of because the state and local requirements are not necessarily the same as the federal requirements. Doctor's notes are okay under the federal law, such as the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, FMLA, and the ADA. In Colorado, they're not okay, although you can request some other information. So be very, very careful when you're considering what documentation you're going to request from an employee who's returning to work. So I said before we talk about accommodating disabilities, and this is a big issue. It's always been a big and difficult issue, but it's particularly difficult now because an employee with a disability may have that disability exacerbated because of the coronavirus. That may be true with things like asthma. It may be true with things like anxiety. You are going to be required to make accommodations. We're going to talk about that in a minute. And one of the accommodations that the EEOC specifically has talked about is accommodations regarding testing. You may have to have a different type of test for employees with certain disabilities. So keep in mind that some of these conditions related to coronavirus may exacerbate an existing disability and it may require different accommodations. Employers are generally required to make reasonable accommodations for disabilities. In order to do that, the employer and the employee must engage in an interactive process regarding the accommodation. That means they have to talk about it. What is your need? What is it that you can't do? Is there anything we could do to help you to accomplish that task so you can do your job? The employer does not need to provide the accommodation the employee wants as long as it provides a reasonable accommodation. There may be several choices about how to by which the employee can be accommodated. If the employer thinks that one choice is better than another, that's okay. They have the discretion to make that decision, even if the employee doesn't feel that way. Employers are not required to make an accommodation because of an undue hardship. Undue hardship has always existed. That's always been the standard. It's always been a very difficult standard because courts really frowned on it. They were going to really call the employer to task if the employer is going to say, this is an undue hardship, so we don't want to make this accommodation. It may be a little easier now during the age of coronavirus. Why? Because employers are under a lot more stress now. Some employers are losing revenue. There aren't as many customers. They've had to close their business for some period of time or an extended period of time. And they don't have as many workers because, the workers can't come to work. So where it might have been easy to simply reassign duties to someone that, for instance, needed leave, and leave can be an accommodation under some circumstances, where it might have been easy to reassign duties to other employees, that might be a lot harder now. So it's probably going to be a little easier to make the undue hardship argument, which would mean you wouldn't have to make a certain accommodation. But I still urge you to be careful about that because it's never going to be an easy argument to make. Okay, so the Families First Coronavirus Response Act is the primary federal law that was enacted to deal with the coronavirus. I don't have enough time here to discuss it in great detail. I've done some writing on this. You can find it on our website. And there's a lot of guidance out there. In fact, some new guidance was just published within the last couple of days. You can find it by Googling. And there's also been new guidance published in the last few days on the Family Medical Leave Act and on wage hour issues that relate to the coronavirus. But just kind of as a bullet point summary, it's in effect till December 31st, 2020, unless it gets extended, which seems more and more likely these days, but we don't know right now. It's only through December 31st, 2020. And it's got two broad categories. One is emergency paid sick leave. That's up to 2 weeks of leave. For the reasons that are bulleted here, I won't repeat them. And that's at full pay except for the child care elements, which is at 2/3 pay. Then the second broad category is expanded FMLA leave for child care, and that is directly related to child care when there's a school closure or daycare is unavailable and the parent needs to take care of the children and for that reason cannot work or telework. And that's also at 2/3 pay. So that's the primary federal law. Colorado just enacted this. The Colorado Healthy Families and Workplaces Act, it went into effect July 15th. This is kind of a recurring theme here, that these laws in this unusual time are just enacted really quickly. Prior to that, there was something called the Colorado Help Rules, which were very similar but different in certain respects. And when they enacted this, effective July 15th, on that same day, they invalidated or they vacated the help rules. So you really need to keep your eye on the ball here. Again, this is Colorado, but I'm very confident that similar things are going on in other states. After December 31st of 2020, there are going to be significant changes. There still are going to be provisions for health emergencies. It's not, after that date, it's not specifically related to coronavirus like it is now, but you can see that it's designed to address a situation just like this in case there's some kind of pandemic in the future. And there is kind of a phase in for smaller employees. A lot of us in Colorado were trying to convince the legislature to have a small employer exemption, but they wouldn't go for that. But what they did go for is a phase in for smaller employees. So they don't have they don't have to comply with this law until 2022. So the other element of the Colorado Healthy Families Workplaces Act is this pandemic provision, which, as I said before, is 80 hours of paid sick leave for conditions related to a public health emergency. If it's under normal circumstances, just for various other reasons, which I'll get to in a minute, it's up to 48 hours paid sick leave per year. And during the coronavirus period, up to 12/31/20, it's 2 weeks. There's no payout upon termination. Interestingly and importantly, this law is not just sick leave. It does not look like a normal sick leave policy. It has a number of other elements for which sick leave can be taken, such as domestic violence, sexual assault, and harassment. And like a lot of employment laws, it's got robust enforcement mechanisms. You can't retaliate against someone for taking leave. You can't retaliate against someone for complaining that you're not complying with the law. And those are powerful penalties. So this is something that Colorado lawyers need to be very careful of. And those of you outside of Colorado need to be very careful of your own state paid leave laws.
So I know many of you, like many businesses out there, are having to enforce wearing masks in your facility, and there's a lot out there about people that are anti-maskers and pretty aggressive about coming to your business. I don't have a great answer for you if you deal with an unruly customer that doesn't want to do it and how to handle this, but post signs, have disposable masks if someone shows up without them. Have someone at your entry that reminds patrons and staff. If you are in a position that you could have some kind of security guard at front, I would recommend having that. But then educate your employees. These are just some general tips for retailers out there of how you can educate your employees about talking to people about wearing masks. And the biggest one is that if you do get to a point where somebody's threatening, you are going to have to call 911. I mean, it's just as simple as that. Obviously you don't want to do that and you don't want to get into that with your customers, but that's really just where we are today. There's so much out there. Congress is trying to do different things right now to help businesses to enforce masks better, but we can't all have the security guard there, and it's just going to come down to an education with your employees about how to handle people that might be aggressive or frustrated about the situation, which is going to lead into Colin talking to you guys a little bit about liability around people that could get coronavirus.
Thanks, Michelle. Before we move on, let me just say another word about masks. A week or maybe a little more than that ago, our Governor Polis, enacted a mask order, but it wasn't real clear. That's a repeated theme with these laws. And Michelle and I just this morning were talking about this. What does that mean? I mean, if I'm sitting in my office by myself, do I need to be wearing a mask? That seems ridiculous. Well, it wasn't true. It wasn't clear under the law. But something just popped up on my phone. He has just, as we have been speaking, issued an FAQ regarding this that clarifies a number of these things, and that's one of them. If you're in your office by yourself, you don't need to wear a mask, but you do need to wear them in common areas, et cetera, et cetera. So just an illustration of how quickly things are changing here. And if you belong to, this one came from the Denver Metro Chamber of Commerce. Some of those organizations can be really useful because they have lobbyists and policy people that keep track of this stuff, and they send out these updates. So that's something that I use personally to keep abreast of these things, and it might be helpful to you, just like this one was with our new lovely mask order. But there is potential liability for employers regarding the coronavirus. The Occupational Safety and Health Act, OSHA, is an agency that has jurisdiction over workplace safety. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that. They do audits and inspections. They issue fines and penalties if they find violations. And if you have an unsafe workplace, because you're not cleaning, you're not doing other things Michelle has been talking about, it is possible that they could fine, penalize you, and require remedial action. Workers' comp laws, of course, could come into play. Workers' comp is the law that provides compensation for workers who are injured on the job or in the course of their duties. And if they get coronavirus in the course of their duties, they're going to be out, and you're going to have workers' comp liabilities. Whistleblower laws have existed for a long time. A whistleblower is somebody that quote unquote blows the whistle, that reports to the employer or sometimes a government agency that something is wrong. In this case, somebody that reports an unsafe workplace. OSHA has a very powerful whistleblower law, and if you fire an employee because the employee says, hey, I don't think this workplace is safe, OSHA might very well take action against you. There are also a number of civil claims that a lawyer could bring on behalf of the employee. In fact, in Colorado, we within the last week or 10 days, the legislature just enacted a new whistleblower law specifically directed towards complaints about coronavirus. And like a lot of these employment laws, it has stiff penalties, it has big teeth. You can get attorney's fees, you can get punitive damages, and a lot of other stuff. Whistleblower laws are very dangerous. Negligence claims can arise from third parties. So if you have vendors that are coming to your facility and they get the coronavirus because you haven't taken the proper precautions, they could bring a negligence claim. Same thing with customers. Now, I don't want to overdo it because these claims are not going to be necessarily easy for employees or third parties to bring, because as part of the thing, as part of their claim, they're going to have to prove that they got the coronavirus because of what the employer did in the workplace or in the facility. That's not necessarily going to be easy, because how are they going to prove it happened there and not at the grocery store or when they went to the park or when they went to the bar the night before? Not necessarily an easy thing to do, but you know, as a lawyer for a business, we don't want to just win the lawsuit. If it happens, we want to keep you out of the lawsuit in the first place. So it's best to keep these things in mind because there is exposure. Legislatures are considering a number of other laws specifically related to the coronavirus, and one of them is to provide immunity for employers if they follow the recommendations of health organizations and take the proper precautions. To my knowledge, these have not passed many times. I know in some states they have passed for certain types of businesses, such as in some states home health care, or not home health care, but elder care facilities. But I don't, to my knowledge, they haven't passed on a widespread basis. There hasn't been a federal law that has passed, but they're talking about it. So this is something to keep your eye on.
So these are just some near-term considerations that I like to point out to everyone right now. You know, you might want to reach out to have a good understanding of your insurance coverage and how things have changed with your insurance as it relates to coronavirus, whether that's your coverage for your employees, you know, also your coverage if you have an outbreak. You know, Colin talked a little bit about liability. You know, just have an understanding of what might have changed there. Also reviewing staff regularly. As I mentioned, you know, our current limit is 50% of the workforce in. I know that's going to be different for state to state and different for your facilities, but understanding really how you can, you know, incrementally increase the number of people that can be in your facility at one time. Laws related to food and alcohol sales, as I've mentioned along the way, you know, Colorado, our last call right now is 10 p.m. Also, if you're a facility, you guys would likely be dubbed a bar if you don't serve food, and therefore you can't even open at all right now. So have a good understanding of, you know, what the timeline is and what the restrictions are for you to get your business up and going again. I encourage everybody to continue to have a protocol in place of what you're going to do if you have a positive test. And Colin and I just had our first positive test in the firm a couple weeks ago, you know, and we're 4 months in. So if you haven't experienced it, I wouldn't be so quick to think that it's not going to happen to you, but have a plan in place. How are you going to let people know? What is the cleaning procedure you're going to put in place? Luckily for us, the people that had tested positive here, we've now had 2, both of which have been working remotely, and we had no concerns about the rest of our office. But also letting your testing protocol before you allow people to return to work. Are you in some, you know, way needing to have people take a test to let you know that they haven't had it or they do? And so just keeping up to date on, you know, this isn't over yet. We're still in the midst of it. And, you know, thinking about how this progresses, what do you need to keep watching about your business to get your doors back open?
Another law that some legislatures are considering, contrary to what I just talked about, are laws which expand employers' liability regarding coronavirus. For instance, here in Colorado, a law was proposed. It did not pass, but it was proposed, and it would have said that there was a presumption that a worker which contracted the coronavirus through work. And that really kind of turns the workers' comp law on its head. Normally, the employee has to prove that the injury or illness is work-related. So that didn't pass, and we were, those of us that represent employers, and I mostly represent employers, we're glad to see that. Other laws that are being considered would impose liability on an employer for failing to follow recommendations of health organizations and to expand whistleblower protection. As I said, Colorado just did expand whistleblower protection, but other states are considering it. And on the federal level, you might say they've already expanded it through the Families First Coronavirus Response Act.
We just want to thank everyone for joining us today and hope that we were able to shed some light on how to get your business up and running. You know, again, we're not experts in your industry exactly, but we've talked to enough people and been collecting information for a while on these topics, and you know, trying to figure out how to get our clients all working, which are a variety of industries as well. And so hopefully we helped you think through the process as well, and Colin was able to shed some light on what you really need to be thinking about to get your staff back in the office.
Thanks, everyone. It's a pleasure talking to you, and you know, you can feel free to reach out to us if you want to talk about this more. There's a lot of guidance out there on the internet. As I said, guidance from agencies like the EEOC. There's a lot of scholarly articles and a lot of other stuff. So, as well as guidance and articles on our website. So, good luck to you all, and happy to talk if people want to talk some more.
Yeah, let me jump in real quick, Colin. If anyone has any questions, please type it into the question bubble at any time, and we can ask these two excellent lawyers who have really helped us out with understanding what's going on with the coronavirus. I think from my standpoint, where do you see us? Where do you see things being? Of course, it may be difficult to see this. Where do you see things being in about 6 months to a year from now? I mean, what type of changes do you see happening?
You know, I've looked at this a lot for our industry, and I don't want to be a complete doomsdayer, but that's kind of the world we're in right now. I don't foresee this ending in the next 6 months. So if we're talking about, you know, what does the rest of 2021 look like? However you're operating right now is likely how you will continue operating. You're probably not going to see many restrictions lifted between now and the end of the year. Now, every state is different, and you know, we have a big election this year, obviously, and so some things are going to, you know, shift with all of that. But we're really not on the track to see a vaccine in the next 6 months or so. And so science-wise, you know, looking at all of that, we're probably going to continue on this path. For our office, you know, we are already, you know, we obviously are very different than you guys in that we have the ability to work remotely, and we've, you know, been continuing to work out the kinks with all of that. But, you know, we figure that even early next year, we'll see some people in that. Furthermore, again, you know, it's a little bit doomsday mentality, but I really don't think that we've even begun to see the impact on our economy. You know, we haven't really dove into a recession yet at this point. You know, people are, you know, still trying to move along. And so, you know, in terms of being someone that runs a business, I continue to operate very conservatively. I continue to operate with the health and safety of all of our employees and clients in mind, and just to try to figure out ways to continue to, you know, how can we do this? How can we be innovative? And I really encourage people to look to other industries, you know, get out there and educate yourself, you know, see what other retailers are doing. There's, you know, great, Walmart's doing some great things. You know, I saw the Kroger brand of grocery stores is doing some great things. So, you know, we can all just continue to learn through each other. As I've said a few times, we've never been through this, and we don't know. And so there's always room to learn. And I've seen things that, you know, when I've got my hair cut for the first time, things they were doing that I've brought into the office. So don't completely put your focus on your industry. Try to get out there and learn from people. Ask your employees, have they seen things that make them feel more comfortable? Are their spouses' works doing great things? You know, just really get out there and try to gather as much information as you possibly can.
Perfect. Thank you, Michelle. We do have another question, and I'm putting it into the chat area. What defines a vulnerable worker?
Well, that's a question for me. It's a legal question, and I'm sorry to say it varies by state to state. In Colorado, under the Safer at Home and the Great Outdoors order, it's defined, and there's a multi-part test, and it includes things like people over the age of 65, people with asthma, and people that a doctor has determined to be vulnerable. So there's a definition under Colorado law, and under most states' laws, I'm sure there is a definition. So it's not the kind of thing that I can just give you three points here and say that's what a vulnerable worker is. You're going to have to look that up for where you are located. But generally, it's people that are older or that have some condition that makes them particularly vulnerable, such as asthma.
Okay, perfect. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions, and I know we're over on out of time. I'm going to turn it back over
Mike,
to Rob.
One more for you guys. It says regarding mask enforcement, we have signage posted stating that if they are unable to wear a mask, to please shop us online in order to protect our high-risk employees. So just a point. Hopefully, you guys all saw that. That's what one retailer is doing. Great. So I thank you, Colin and Michelle. This is a lot of information. Obviously, as you guys can see, first of all, I want to thank Legacy Billiards for sponsoring all of our webinar sessions. As you know, there was a lot of information and resources provided today. We're going to post this PowerPoint on the website as soon as we can get it, and also the presentation. And so you're welcome to watch it again. There's some resources that they have in the PowerPoint that you guys can take a look at. And again, as you heard today, there's a lot of research you can do in your own state for what guidelines they have. Today was great parameters for all of us. I think the big message today for me is that we have to take this seriously, not only with our customers, but also with our employees, and that's why we did this. Quick reminder, tune in tomorrow. We're gonna have a special on using social media to drive sales, even during a pandemic. And again, get on the app, visit the exhibitors, take a look at their specials, take part in the community. Part of it, there's a lot of questions even that were discussed today that you guys can get involved in. And appreciate you participating in today's webinar, and we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you.